The autumn of 1883 brought more than just changing leaves to the Montana Territory. It brought secrets, terror, and an unexpected collision between a woman running for her life and a man who had stopped believing anyone would ever need him for anything except hard work and solitude. Daniel Cole Crawford had been running the Silver Creek Ranch alone for 7 years, ever since his father died and left him 3,000 acres of prime Montana grassland, 200 head of cattle, and the crushing loneliness that came from being the only person for 20 miles in any direction. At 34, Cole had accepted that his life would be one of quiet isolation, working from dawn to dusk, eating solitary meals, and sleeping in an empty house that felt more like a tomb than a home. He told himself he preferred the solitude, that dealing with people meant dealing with betrayal and disappointment, that isolation was safety rather than slow death. But on a cold October evening when Cole went to check on his horses before bed, everything he'd convinced himself about wanting to be alone was shattered by a sound that didn't belong in his carefully controlled world. Someone was crying in his barn, not the casual tears of mild distress, but the desperate, terrified sobbing of someone who had been pushed beyond endurance and was clinging to composure by sheer willpower alone. Cole grabbed his lantern and his rifle, approaching the barn with the cautious awareness of someone who had learned that unexpected visitors on the frontier rarely brought good news. What he found behind a stack of hay bales made his breath catch in his throat, and his protective instincts flared to life in ways he'd thought were long dead. A woman crouched there, young, maybe 27 or 28, with long, dark hair that hung in tangles around a face that would have been beautiful if not marked by obvious exhaustion and barely controlled terror. Her dress was torn and dirty, suggesting she'd been traveling rough for days, and her eyes held the kind of fear that came from being hunted rather than simply lost. When she saw Cole's massive frame silhouetted in the barn doorway, she pressed herself further back into the hay with a small cry of despair. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from crying and probably screaming. "Please don't send me back. I'll do anything, work for nothing, just please don't send me back to him." Cole set down his rifle immediately, recognizing that this woman needed reassurance rather than additional threats. "Easy now," he said gently, lowering himself to a crouch to seem less intimidating. "I'm not going to send you anywhere. This is my ranch, and you're safe here. What's your name?" And that's when you realize this isn't just about finding a trespasser. It's about two lonely souls discovering they've been waiting their whole lives for exactly this moment, which is exactly why you should hit that subscribe button right now, because watching how this isolated rancher and terrified widow save each other will prove that the greatest love stories begin when someone is brave enough to offer sanctuary to a stranger in desperate need. The woman stared at Cole with the wary assessment of someone who had learned the hard way that men's promises meant nothing when their desires conflicted with their words. But something in Cole's weathered face, in the way he'd immediately put down his weapon and made himself smaller and less threatening, made her take a chance on honesty. "My name is Catherine. Catherine Blackwood. I'm running from my husband's family. They want to claim me as property to settle his debts, and Her voice broke. "I can't go back. I'd rather die out here in the wilderness than let them sell me like they're planning." Cole felt rage building in his chest at the familiar story. He'd heard variations of it before. Widows claimed as property by in-laws or creditors, sold into servitude under legal fictions that made slavery respectable. The frontier had laws, but those laws protected property and power rather than vulnerable people. "How long have you been running?" Cole asked, studying Catherine's exhausted face and torn clothing. 5 days, maybe 6. I've lost track." Catherine's hands were shaking as she wrapped her arms around herself. "I had a horse, but she went lame 2 days ago and I had to leave her. I've been walking since then, hiding during the day when I heard riders, trying to put distance between me and them. When I saw your barn tonight, I thought maybe I could hide here for a few hours, rest before I kept moving." "You don't have to keep moving," Cole said firmly. "You can stay here, get cleaned up, get some real food and rest. My ranch is isolated enough that no one's going to find you unless I tell them you're here, and I promise you I won't do that. But you haven't seen the most important part yet." Catherine wanted to believe him, wanted to trust this stranger, whose first instinct had been to make himself less threatening rather than assert his power over her vulnerable situation. But 5 days of terror had taught her that trusting too quickly could be fatal. "Why would you help me? You don't know me. For all you know, I could be lying about everything, could be dangerous, could be a woman who's been running scared for almost a week and needs help," Cole interrupted gently. "Could be someone who's been treated like property when she's clearly a person with her own rights and dignity. Could be exactly what you say you are. A widow trying to escape being sold into servitude by people who should be protecting you instead of exploiting you." He stood up slowly, keeping his movements non-threatening. "I'm going back to the house to heat water for a bath and make some food. You can come inside where it's warm and safe, or you can stay out here in the barn. Either way, I promise nobody's going to hurt you on my property. You have my word, Catherine Blackwood, and I don't give my word lightly." Catherine watched him walk away, leaving his rifle behind, a gesture of trust that spoke louder than any promises. After a long moment of the internal debate, she followed him toward the ranch house, her exhausted body overruling her cautious mind's protests. The house was simple but well-maintained, with the kind of comfortable functionality that came from years of bachelor living. Cole showed Catherine to a spare bedroom with clean sheets and a door that locked from the inside, then disappeared to heat water and prepare food while she cleaned up. When Catherine emerged an hour later, wearing a clean shirt Cole had provided that hung on her like a dress, her face scrubbed and her hair washed and braided, Cole could see past the exhaustion and terror to the woman beneath. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that. She carried herself with a dignity that hadn't been broken, despite circumstances that would have destroyed most people. Over a meal of stew and fresh bread, Catherine's full story emerged in pieces. She'd been married for 2 years to Thomas Blackwood, a merchant who had seemed respectable until she discovered he was deeply in debt to dangerous people. When Thomas died suddenly of a heart condition, his family had immediately moved to claim Catherine as an asset to be sold to satisfy his creditors, using an obscure territorial law that treated widows as transferable property under certain debt circumstances. "I tried to fight it legally," Catherine explained, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee like it was a lifeline. "But Thomas's family has connections, money, influence. The judge ruled against me, said I had to submit to being sold or face criminal charges for attempting to defraud creditors. So I ran. I took what little money I had hidden, bought a horse, and I've been running ever since." Wait, don't miss what happens next. Cole listened with growing fury at the injustice Catherine had suffered, but also with growing respect for her courage in choosing to fight rather than submit. "How much is the debt?" $1,200, Catherine said bitterly. $1,200 is apparently what my life and freedom are worth according to territorial law. Cole was quiet for a long moment, calculation visible in his weathered features. "What if I paid it? Bought your contract and then immediately freed you so you could go wherever you wanted without anyone having legal claim on you." Catherine stared at him in shock. "That's an enormous amount of money. Why would you spend that on a complete stranger?" "Because it's not right," Cole said simply. "Because selling people is wrong, regardless of what legal fiction you use to justify it. And because..." He paused, then continued with surprising vulnerability. "Because I've been alone on this ranch for 7 years, convincing myself I preferred isolation. But 5 minutes after finding you hiding in my barn, I remembered what it felt like to have someone to protect, someone to care about, someone to make this empty house feel like maybe it could be a home instead of just a place where I work until I die." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at his honesty. "Cole, you don't know me. What if I'm not worth saving? What if..." "You're worth saving because you're a human being who deserves freedom and dignity," Cole interrupted firmly. "Everything else we can figure out as we go. But first thing tomorrow, I'm riding to town, paying off your debt with the judge, getting the contract destroyed, and making sure Thomas Blackwood's family has no legal claim on you whatsoever." You can stay here while I'm gone, or you can come with me, or you can leave and go wherever you want. But either way, you're going to be free. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what comes next." The next morning, Cole rode to town with $1,200 in cash and a determination to end Catherine's nightmare through the same legal system that had created it. Catherine insisted on coming with him, unwilling to hide any longer and wanting to face her accusers with the knowledge that she had an ally willing to fight for her freedom. The confrontation in the judge's office was tense, but ultimately successful. Cole's cash payment satisfied the debt legally, and his reputation as an honest rancher with no tolerance for injustice made the judge reluctant to try any legal tricks that might complicate the transaction. Thomas Blackwood's family protested loudly about being denied their rightful asset, but their protests carried no legal weight once the debt was satisfied in full. When the judge handed Catherine the destroyed contract and official documentation of her freedom, she felt something break open in her chest. Years of feeling like property rather than person, suddenly releasing under the weight of legally recognized autonomy. "You're free," the judge said gruffly. "The debt is satisfied, the contract is destroyed, and nobody has any legal claim on you. Go wherever you want. Do whatever you want. The territory recognizes you as a free woman with full rights." Outside the courthouse, Catherine turned to Cole with tears streaming down her face. "You spent $1,200 to free a stranger. How can I ever repay you?" Cole's smile was gentle. "You don't owe me repayment, Catherine. You owe me honest answers to 2 questions, and then you're free to make whatever choice you want." "What questions?" Catherine asked. "First question, where do you want to go now that you're free? Do you have family somewhere, a place you've been trying to reach, dreams you've been putting off while running for your life?" Catherine thought about it, then shook her head slowly. "I have no family left. No place I was trying to reach. I was just running away rather than running toward anything specific." "Second question," Cole said, his voice careful and hopeful. "Would you consider staying at Silver Creek Ranch? Not as a servant or someone paying off a debt, but as someone I'd like to get to know better, someone who makes that empty house feel less empty. Someone I'd like to see if maybe we could build something together if you're willing to take a chance on a lonely rancher who's forgotten how to be around people." Catherine felt her heart race at the offer, not because she felt obligated or trapped, but because in the 24 hours since hiding in his barn, she'd seen more genuine kindness from Cole Crawford than she'd experienced in her entire marriage. "Cole, I'm a widow with no money, no prospects, no—" "You're a woman with courage, dignity, and the strength to choose freedom over security," Cole interrupted. "Those are the things that matter. Everything else we can figure out together if you're willing to give it a try." Their first kiss happened naturally a month later, after weeks of working together around the ranch, sharing meals, and gradually opening their hearts to the possibility that isolation might have been protection against hurt, but it was also protection against joy, connection, and love. Catherine discovered she had a natural talent for ranch management, particularly the financial aspects that Cole had been handling haphazardly for years. Under her organization, Silver Creek Ranch's profits increased significantly, allowing them to expand operations and hire additional hands. More importantly, Catherine brought life back to Cole's existence, laughter, conversation, companionship, and the slow healing of wounds both had been carrying from their respective pasts. Cole brought Catherine safety, respect, and the first relationship where she was valued as a partner rather than treated as property. The proposal came during the first snow of winter, when the ranch transformed into a white wonderland, and Cole finally put into words what both of them had been feeling for months. "Catherine Blackwood," Cole said, taking her hands in his work-roughened ones, "you came into my life hiding in my barn, terrified and exhausted from running. You've transformed this ranch from a place where I merely existed into a home where I actually want to live. You've shown me that isolation wasn't peace. It was just fear wearing a different name. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend my life proving that spending $1,200 to free you was the best investment I ever made, and that loving you is the greatest privilege I could receive? Catherine threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying simultaneously. Yes, Cole Crawford. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll build a life with you on this beautiful ranch. And yes, I'll spend every day grateful that when I was running scared and desperate, I stumbled onto your property and found not just sanctuary, but the man I was meant to spend my life with. The wedding took place in spring, with half the territory attending because word had spread about the rancher who'd spent a fortune freeing a widow from debt servitude and then fell in love with her. When the preacher asked if Cole took Catherine as his wife, his answer rang across the prairie with absolute conviction. I take this woman who showed me what real courage looks like when she chose to run rather than submit to being sold. I promise to use my resources to protect her freedom, my strength to support her dreams, and every day of my life to prove that she made the right choice, trusting a lonely rancher who had forgotten what it meant to have someone to care for. Catherine's vows were equally powerful. Cole, you found me hiding in your barn, and instead of seeing a problem or an opportunity for exploitation, you saw a person who needed help. You've shown me that real strength is measured by what you protect rather than what you control, that real love means giving freedom rather than demanding submission, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the most desperate circumstances. I promise to value your generosity, to honor your courage in choosing connection over isolation, and to build with you a life where both of us are valued for who we are rather than what we can provide. Years passed, and Silver Creek Ranch flourished under Cole and Catherine's partnership. They raised 4 children who grew up understanding that their mother had been bought and freed by their father, teaching them that money spent on someone's freedom was always money well spent. Cole used his wealth and influence to help dozens of other people escape debt servitude, always offering them the same choice he'd given Catherine: freedom to leave or freedom to stay, no obligations attached. On their 20th anniversary, as they watched their children working with the cattle, Catherine reflected on the night she'd hidden in Cole's barn. Do you ever regret spending $1,200 to free a stranger? That was nearly everything you'd saved. Cole pulled her close, this woman who had transformed his isolated existence into a life filled with love, purpose, and joy. Not for 1 second. That $1,200 bought me freedom too. Freedom from loneliness, from believing I'd die alone, from thinking isolation was safer than connection. You were the best investment I ever made, Catherine, and I'd spend it again in a heartbeat. Best worst day of my life, Catherine said, kissing him while their children pretended not to notice. Worst because I was running terrified through the wilderness, believing I'd die before letting them sell me. Best because it brought me to your barn, to your protection, and eventually to your heart. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that real love grows from the willingness to protect someone's freedom rather than control their choices, then you've found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Romance Stories for more tales of sanctuary, courage, and love that grows when someone is brave enough to offer help without demanding anything in return. From hiding places to homesteads, every story we tell proves that the greatest partnerships are built not on ownership, but on mutual respect, freely given protection, and the courage to choose connection over isolation. This is where running widows find sanctuary, where lonely ranchers find purpose, and where love proves that freedom is the foundation of every beautiful relationship.